purpose of this podcast is not to advocate polygamy, but just to state the facts about polygamy history in the Bible. First of all, I'd like to start off by stating that in the Old Testament, God authorized polygamy to Moses on Mount Sinai after God gave the famous 10 Commandments to Moses in Exodus 20. There weren't really only 10 commandments, there were more commandments than that. But after the popular 10 commandments, the next chapter, Exodus 21, verse 10, God says to Moses from Mount Sinai, if he, meaning a man, take him another wife, for her food, her raiment, her duty of marriage shall not diminish. Then later in Deuteronomy 21, Moses explains more about the polygamy law and the laws governing polygamy. And we know in the beginning of Deuteronomy that it's God speaking because it says so in the first couple of chapters of Deuteronomy. And so the following chapters of Deuteronomy is a continuation of what God is saying to Moses. Verse 15 of Deuteronomy 21, if a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, and they have borne him sons, and both be beloved, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers, that was hated, and then a semicolon, it goes on. But it's basically showing that God authorized polygamy. Now, in Samuel, 2 Samuel 12, God, through the prophet Nathan, authorized David to be a polygamist. So it says in 2 Samuel 12, verse 5, so Nathan said to David, thou art the man, thus saith the Lord God of Israel. So he's saying, according to God, speaking in the name of God, or God giving Nathan the revelation, I anointed thee king over Israel. So he's quoting God. I anointed thee king over Israel, and I delivered thee out of the hand of Saul. And I gave thee thy master's house and thy master's wives into thy bosom. And then it continues. So it's God speaking through Nathan saying, I gave you Saul's wives after Saul died. So there are many characters in the Old Testament who had multiple wives, and I'll name them, and I will state whether they were considered unrighteous or righteous or neutral. I mean, neutral means it doesn't really say if they were righteous or not. And then there's mixed, and mixed would mean they were righteous at one time and then not righteous at another time, maybe back and forth. Lamech, Cain's line, had multiple wives. He was not a righteous man. Abraham had 3 wives, 2 at the same time, and maybe 3 at the same time, but we know 2 were at the same time. He was a righteous man. He was a prophet of God. Nahor, Abraham's brother, it's neutral. He had multiple wives. Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel by God, and who saw God, and who is the ancestor of Jesus Christ, as well as Abraham was the ancestor of Jesus Christ. Jacob had 4 wives simultaneously, and he was a prophet of God and was a righteous man. Then his brother Esau, it was mixed. He was sometimes righteous, sometimes not. He had multiple wives. Elkanah, the father of the prophet Samuel was a righteous man. He had 2 wives. Gideon, a righteous judge of Israel, had many wives. He had 70 sons, not to mention how many daughters he had. Then there was Saul, had multiple wives. It was mixed. He was righteous sometimes, and other times he was not righteous. He had multiple wives. Implied through the prophet Nathan, meaning it is believed the prophet Nathan, having authority from God, allowed Saul to be a polygamist. Then again, there's David, of course. Then there's Solomon, had multiple wives. He fell into apostasy. Most of his wives, if not all, were not wives that were authorized. Rehoboam, he was righteous and unrighteous back and forth, had 18 wives. There was Abijah. Well, Rehoboam had 18 wives and 60 concubines. Then there's Abijah, also known as Abijam, had 14 wives. He was righteous and unrighteous mixed. Joash, He had 2 wives. He was a righteous man initially. Caleb was a righteous man. He had several wives. Ashur had 2 wives. It was neutral. It doesn't say if he was righteous or not. Shaharaim had 2 wives. It's neutral on whether he was righteous or not. Ibzan, he was a righteous judge, had 30 sons and 30 daughters. It doesn't say he had multiple wives, but with 30 sons and 30 daughters, it's implied he was a polygamist. Abdon, a righteous judge, had 40 sons, not to mention how many daughters, so it's likely he had to have been a polygamist, having 40 sons and X amount of daughters. Gilead, he was unclear whether he was righteous or not, and he had multiple wives. Samuel, we talked about him. Job, he had many children. We don't think he was necessarily polygamist. His wives probably not at the same time, but he had many, many children. Many unnamed patriarchs in the Book of Chronicles genealogies. There are many men mentioned who had 20 to 40 sons, not to mention how many daughters. So they must have been polygamists, having 20 to 40 sons. Other possible cases, we mentioned those. It's unknown if Joshua had multiple wives. It's possible that he did. We don't know. There are other kings that possibly had multiple wives. And that's about it. So I'm not advocating polygamy. I'm just stating the facts that polygamy existed a lot in the Old Testament, anywhere from 23 to 27 polygamists. Many of them were righteous men, and many of them were prophets. Some of them were prophets of God, such as Jacob and Abraham, and many of them were authorized to be polygamists by a prophet of God, and God himself authorized polygamy in Exodus chapter 21, speaking to Moses. So those are the facts, and thank you for listening.